Hello, everyone. Today I've got Matt McChlery with me, who is a deacon in a church in Cambridgeshire, in a place called Wisbech, where I used to live actually, and used to attend. And we're going to be talking about faith. Is it relevant in a time of crisis? So, obviously, because of coronavirus, churches have been closed, services have been cancelled, including services that lots of people go to, such as funerals, baptisms, weddings, etc. In the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury has issued a statement to congregations and to clergy to practice their faith from home, and for clergy to do the same. So, first question to Matt. Hello, by the way, Matt.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Pleasure, as always. First question then. What does Christianity have to say in a time of crisis?
Oh,
Big
Christianity's
question.
actually got quite a lot to say. Yeah, it is a big question in a time of crisis. I think what this time of crisis in particular has done is it's actually kind of forced us to face some uncomfortable truths in a way, where certain things that we've come to just take for granted, like, meeting together or going to church on a Sunday, or maybe it's the youth group set up that the church has got, or whatever it is. And we take for granted that, the musicians are there and there's music and, there's tea and coffee afterwards, and we're all quite comfortable, aren't we, in our own little bubbles. And this has kind of forced us to really take a step back and to look at ourselves and to say, well, what actually really matters, and what actually really do we believe, and what's just stuff that's nice but not essential, and what is actually the heart of what we believe. And so, does Christianity have something to say in a time of suffering? Most certainly, yes, it does. We are called to be Christ's followers, and at the moment when we're recording this now, it's Holy Week, and we've just had Good Friday, where that's just one of many occasions when Jesus suffered, quite literally and quite physically, being tortured, being crucified, being nailed to a cross, dying, enduring quite a lot of brutality and suffering in a physical way. And we remember that. And of course, we look forward to Easter Sunday when he rises again from the dead. But does Christianity have anything to say about a time of suffering? Well, yeah, because we're called to follow Jesus. We're called to follow his example. But we may not physically be nailed to a cross ourselves, but Jesus comes and he says, you guys, there's going to be some suffering in your life. And when that happens, what do you do? I mean, just look at the parable of the rock, building your house on the rock and building your house on the sand. The whole point of that is, when the storms of life come, when the storms of life hit, where do you stand? Are you standing on the rock? Have you built your life on firm, solid foundations which are found in Jesus, or not? And it's in these times of testing where either our faith gets refined and moves us closer to Jesus as he brings us through a time of suffering. We quite often pray that we get delivered from the suffering. Oh, may it not happen to me. Please deliver me from this. But sometimes God delivers us through things.
That's an interesting. I'm just to interrupt you there, because that is, I mean, that idea that it's not going to happen to me is quite very much embedded in Western culture in many ways, isn't it? Suffering in the last 40 or 50 years or so has predominantly been for people over there, people in other places. And now that it has, made us change. It has made us change the way that we live quite dramatically, in the sense of us going from living very social lives most of the time to some of us being very isolated, either in families or alone. That's a very radical change, isn't it? Just focusing on the figure of Jesus then, and this idea of isolation. I mean, Jesus was he spent a lot of his adult life. Well, he spent a few years of his adult life preaching, didn't he? But he also spent time alone as well.
A lot of time alone.
Can we in our isolation look to Jesus as or in his solitude, and perhaps learn from that?
Yeah, most definitely. I've been reading a great book about worship at the moment called How Would Jesus Lead Worship? And one of it starts off by defining what worship is, and it's not actually singing songs, surprisingly. Something I've been wanting to discuss more for a very long time now. But basically it says worship is drawing near to God, worship is obeying God, and worship is glorifying God. And we do that through all aspects of our lives. And so drawing near to God can be done in a variety of contexts. I mean, you can draw near to God with a group of people in church, and I would still encourage people, even though we are isolated at present, it's important to remain connected to a body of believers, to encourage each other, to refresh each other, to spur each other on, to carry each other's burdens. The togetherness is part of what it means to be a Christian. I mean, you're born into a Christian family, so maintaining that contact in whatever way you can at this time, through phone calls or emails or online messages or whatever, is very important to continue to do. But yet at the same time, it could give more opportunity for some in the space and in the quietness and in the alone time to actually do some drawing near, where you can sit in the quiet. I mean, like Elijah in the cave, he didn't hear God in the fire or the earthquake, but he heard a still small voice, as he was alone in this cave in the middle of nowhere. And we see Jesus as well withdrawing into the wilderness. I mean, straight after his baptism, he doesn't go and hit the streets or appear on God TV and, address the masses or whatever in a stadium or whatever. He doesn't do that. Holy Spirit actually leads him away into a place of insignificance, into a place of humility, into a place of dryness and barrenness and aloneness, where he then faces these temptations and that kind of stuff, sets himself up
but
ministry.
But again, to come in on that, I think this for a lot of people is incredibly difficult, and it's difficult as a church which is predominantly a communal experience for all of us, that we sometimes depend on these rituals, like the act of communion, for example. If one of your loved one dies, having that funeral service there is an act of closure in many ways, in terms of the grieving process for many. And also this idea, Jesus himself said, according to the Gospels, where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I am there with them. And now we've got this virus that stops us from doing that. I mean, I know you said that worship can be a solitary experience, but for example, how should a Christian deal with not taking communion, not taking the bread and the wine as they were used to doing? How could they perhaps overcome the ritualistic ideas behind their faith?
Yeah, so for me, the tradition I'm in, and I come from, we don't need a priest to necessarily cross the T's and dot the I's and do the bows at the right time in order for communion to be meaningful. We can actually do communion ourselves, and where I get that from biblically is Jesus has called us all to be prophets and priests and kings. So actually, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, there is a certain amount of priestly anointing upon each one of us that can enable us to worship Jesus because it's about Jesus. It's about him. And that, for me, that's the bottom line. It's about Jesus. It's not about some priest somewhere or some other person. I mean, it's great if you get to do it there with them and you enjoy the whole experience. I'm not denying that, but I'm saying if you're in a place where you can't, does that mean you can't? Well, you can. And I mean, I've heard some crazy stories, and I've been in some crazy places, like baptism, for example. I've heard of people getting baptized in puddles and bathtubs and things. They hadn't waited to get to a specific building and a specific place because they really felt that this is something that God wanted them to do then. I was baptized in a swimming pool.
I'm reminded of the story of a bishop who was imprisoned, and this was in the 1800s sometime, and he couldn't do the service of communion because he didn't have bread and wine. But what he did instead is he had the light coming through the window as the wine, the blood of Christ, and then the dust on the floor, because the prison was very dusty, as the body of Christ, and he used what he had at his disposal to have this service of worship and fellowship in that way. Let's talk about now what you think this crisis will do to the future of the church. I'm talking. I mean, I know you're from a specific denomination, and so I'm talking church here with capital C, as broadly as possible, because historically speaking, plague such as this, I suppose we could call it a plague in that way, has had quite dramatic implications for society. I'm just giving two historical examples here, since I'm a history teacher. The plague of Athens was noted by a historian at the time for people abandoning religious ritual. That obviously they've been worshipping the Greek gods, and there'd been lots of ritualism associated with that. But he was surprised by how quickly people gave that up and moved away from faith because they were worried and panicking about this disease. Also, on the completely other side of the spectrum here, the Black Death, when it came in the Middle Ages, resulted in, as part of its spiritual effect, a group called the Flagellants rising up in the Catholic Church. So these were people who they were called the Flagellants because they whipped themselves in punishment, believing that God was punishing them for their sin. So what do you think this could do for the future of the church with a capital C?
Well, I think that the future of the church is bright. And something like this, because it doesn't just force Christians to take a moment to reflect on their lives. It has a profound effect on everybody. And I'm hoping and praying that, first of all, that this will spark a revival, not just in the UK, but around the world, where people have actually come to a point of discovering their need for Jesus and their need for a Saviour, their need for hope in a hopeless world, their need for a healer in the midst of disease. I really pray that they will come to that point as a result of this. But secondly, I also pray that the church will be forever changed. We don't just go back to the same old way of doing things. I mean, although we've stopped meeting physically in buildings, I think from what I've been experiencing and seeing, it's amazing how the barriers and the divisions between certain church streams or denominations have actually started coming down quite spectacularly. Oh, well, our church isn't doing a service at the moment. Oh, well, why don't you come and join us and do ours? We all believe in Jesus, so why not? And let's share resources. And we've got this video about this. Do you want to use it on Sunday for your website or whatever? And there's a coming together, sort of in the Christian community, which I think is quite significant, quite powerful.
Brilliant. Speaking of coming together, Matt, I'm just going to interrupt you there because we've got Father Hux who's going to join us.
Oh,
now.
Brilliant.
So we're joined now by Father Hux, who's a school chaplain, Church of England chaplain. And well, let's go straight in with a question, Father Hux. We've been talking so far about how the coronavirus may well shape the future of the church. And in fact, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Desmond Tutu have issued a statement talking about the need for the church to change, to adapt to this crisis. In what ways do you think the church with a big C, if you like, will change as a result of the coronavirus?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things that it's forced us to do is to think differently about how we engage with people. And it's been fantastic on the different social media outlets to see priests who perhaps would never have tried Zoom or Facebook Live or YouTube Live or anything like that, having to work out how to do this. But in doing so, actually, what they're doing is they're reaching different audiences across those social media platforms. And one of the things that priests that I know have found is that there are more people tuning into their live broadcast services from their dining room and from their study and whatever than they have in their usual congregations in church on Sunday morning. So this, what I hope will be a very short period of time, what this period of time is doing is forcing us to engage in different ways, and therefore we're reaching different audiences, and that's great. The big question for us is, how will we go on to continue reaching out to those audiences once we're back in our churches and doing what we do on
That's
Sunday?
an interesting question. Something we've discovered as well. So yes, we're doing all the online stuff and things ourselves, but something else that has been an interesting one is, yes, there's this great potential to reach new audience, but it's also a bit of a struggle, but we have to think differently for those who don't have access to the internet as well, because we do have some people without access to the internet or Facebook or whatever, and so it's working out. So yes, we can support lots of people online, but there's also that balance and that recognition that there's people who aren't online, and how do we go about continuing to provide that support and that community for them, when it's obviously at this point in time much more difficult for them to engage. When you're online, it's much more easy to engage in a sort of virtual sense, but if you're completely cut off from that, it becomes, how does that look in that situation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have some people who come up to the school chapel on a Sunday morning from the local estate, the local housing estate. They have special dispensation to do that. And of course, over the last few days, I've been sort of scrambling around trying to find phone numbers so that I can reach out to them and just check in with them and see that they're okay and that they're getting what they need. But in a funny sort of way, I think, the Church of England particularly has been engaged in this kind of work for always. There was a piece of research published last year that, the Church of England is engaged in over 30,000 community projects across the country. And actually, we're continuing to do those. The food banks are still open. We're still reaching out to the elderly, the infirm, people who are on the fringes of our communities. So what I also hope this will do is draw the outside world's attention to the connections that the Church of England and the churches in general have with the community, because I suspect that a lot of people think that those connections don't exist anymore, and the church is dying and it's losing any of its influence and any of its reach. But actually, it really isn't, and I'm hopeful that people will kind of tune back into that and see the good that's going on already.
Absolutely. On the note of the absence of technology, I called a 91-year-old lady today and I said I was talking to the both of you later. She said, "What time's it going to be on TV then, dear?" I said, "We're not that famous yet. Perhaps perhaps one day." One thing I'd like to ask you both as church leaders, though, is that in I think it's Spain, there was a couple of priests going around and actually giving the sacrament. This was Catholic priests going around and giving the sacrament to coronavirus patients in hospitals. And one of my friends, who's also a member of the Anglican clergy, had commented on it. "I feel so useless. I never felt much more useless in my life." Is there any way in which you are frustrated by the fact that you, as church leaders, have to abide by these restrictions, and you can't be out there ministering to people on that personal basis as much as you would perhaps like to.
I think that's right. And, one of the things that this whole period is teaching everybody, I think, regardless of whether you are a person of faith or not, is how much human connection matters. When those links, those physical links, when being in the physical presence of someone, it has been severed, you suddenly begin to understand that that's really important. And I know for a lot of my colleagues, and for me, it's really hard not to be able to go and sit with someone, to go and be with someone, to hold their hand in the way that we might do. And that's forcing us to think really hard about how we can do that. But I think the other thing is that the church needs to be really sensible about this. And it also needs to own what it's allowed to do. There aren't that, we are designated as priests and deacons and ministers. We are designated as the workers who have exemptions. So there are lots of things that we can do at the front line that I think we really should take advantage of. Okay, we can't be in our churches. We can't be leading services in the way that we might normally do. But there are things that we can do, and we need to own those and do those really, really well, I think.
What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
I would agree. It does bring quite a different dynamic when you're not in the same space as somebody else. What it's done for me is it's forced me to do things differently. And again, it's reaching people who I normally wouldn't have done. So once a day, pretty much 6 days a week, at 8:30 in the morning, I'm live on YouTube, just kind of sharing a thought or a song, and then I pray together with the people who have joined in, and they put comments in and prayer requests and stuff, and we just kind of have a 20-minute time just together every morning. It has been tricky getting out of bed sometimes to do that, but that's something I wouldn't have done until this situation has come along. And actually, there's some people who come to our church who are quite poorly, and they don't manage to get to church very often because they almost housebound and that kind of thing. But they're some of the most regular people tuning in every morning to this, that kind of ministry in a different way. So yes, it is frustrating not being physically present with people, but yeah, hopefully it's helping us to try and adapt and change and possibly find the gold in amongst the bad stuff. Yeah.
Father Hux.
Yeah,
sorry, Matt and I were talking earlier about kind of traditional religious ritual in services, and of course this features more heavily in Anglican worship than it does kind of modern evangelical worship. So how do you as a church leader in the Anglican Church overcome those difficulties of making sure that people still feel part of the communion of the Anglican Church, even though they're not going through those ritualistic aspects of devotion?
Sure, it's a really good question, and it's particularly ripe at the moment because, of course, we're going through the kind of the most important week of the Christian calendar, when we would normally be in a very ritualistic kind of way, marking those key events. I think one of the things that's really important for me that I can do as a priest of the Church of England is that I can offer Holy Communion. I can say the Eucharist, and I think sometimes we underestimate the residual kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The residual acknowledgement of the importance of priesthood amongst the general public. When you go out dressed in your dog collar, as we call it, people will stop. They will talk to you. They will tell you something that's going on in their lives. They will ask you to remember them, or send one up for me, Father, is the one that you often get. And I think there's still power in that people still acknowledge that. So things like in the offering of Holy Communion, one of the things that I say to people is, would you like me to pray for you? I'm saying Holy Communion at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and I will pray for you out loud. I will say your name at the altar during my time of prayer, at the offering of Holy Communion, at the breaking of the bread. And I think people find that incredibly powerful. They know that first of all, they know that they're known, that they've been remembered, they've been acknowledged. And not only have they been remembered and acknowledged, that they've been remembered at the most important act of Christian worship. And I think there is something really powerful in that. That's something that as a priest I definitely can do for people is to pray for them, particularly at the altar, because basically what we're saying when we pray for people is that they are acknowledged by me as a Christian minister, but they are named before God, and that's incredibly powerful, I think. And I think that's one of the ways in which I can ritualistically, kind of engage with this current situation, and I hope and I think it's helping.
Absolutely. I suppose for Christians as individuals, having a rich and vibrant prayer life is ever more important at a time when it's quite difficult to keep to have your kind of usual daily schedule when it's disrupted. It's really important to keep those types of things going. Finally then, last but not least, let's talk about the Christian community, and perhaps we'll finish on what you think the Christian community should be doing in this time of crisis to deal with things such as being by themselves or being in a much more extreme situation of closeness with their families that they may well not be used to. Matt, would you like to start us on that one? What do you think the Christian community should be doing?
Yeah, I think one of the things the Christian community should be doing right now is leading by example. All these measures have been put into place for not just our own safety, but also for the safety of those around us, and especially the most vulnerable in society. And what does that say if the church or the Christians down the road that completely ignore the advice or go against things, and it's not showing the love of Christ if we go against it. Some people are starting to say, oh, it's religious persecution because we're not allowed to meet together. Well, it isn't religious persecution because everybody is not allowed to meet together. No one's being singled out here. No group is being singled out for one reason or another. So it's affecting all of us. And I think it's important that we lead by example. But then I think secondly, it's really important that we follow the commands of Jesus. Simply, just keep it simple. Basically, what's the greatest command? To love one another, to love each other, just as Jesus loves us, to show that love, to love God and to love our neighbor. And so in our situation, in whatever way that looks for each of us, because each of us has a different situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, I'm in a house full of kids and all sorts of stuff. So my devotional time has actually taken a bit of a nosedive during this, because it's really quite difficult when you've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old kind of all crawling all over you all day long to find that space. But so for me, it's different to someone who's completely on their own. You see what I'm saying? So we're in different situations. So whatever that looks like for you, love God, try and draw near to him in this time, and also in whatever way you are able to, love your neighbors.
Thank you very much, Matt. Father Hux, would you like to add to those two fantastic things?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I was having a conversation earlier today with someone, and they were saying, I feel so helpless. I can't do anything. And one of the things that I said to them was, actually, yes, you can do something, and you are doing something. You're staying at home. And that is actually a very active thing for you to be doing.
Yeah.
Because in staying at home, you are doing all of the things that the government keeps telling us. We're staying at home, we're protecting the NHS, we're saving lives. But actually, I think we underestimate the power of the small acts like staying at home. That is, in fact, a thing that we can be doing. But I think what's really important for Christians and for people of faith in general is that we have an overarching narrative that kind of governs what it is that we think and we say and we do. We don't act out of impulse. We act out of a particular narrative. And that narrative is that we are loved and we are called to love. And that kind of has to be, as Matt said, that has to be the kind of the green screen behind everything that we do. And that will look different in different circumstances. But it's about asking ourselves, what is the most loving thing that we can be doing for God's children where we are in our place and in our time? And I think if we do that, then we'll be doing some good. And that will look different for everybody. It might be phoning an elderly neighbour regularly. It might be dropping some shopping off. It might be, one of the things that I'm doing is, I work in a boarding school. And so we have a very strong sense of place. And we are, as a community, we are uprooted and we're dispersed at the moment. And that could go on for quite a while. So one of the things that I'm doing, which I hope is helpful, is posting out videos for the whole community so that they can feel hopefully attached to the community wherever they are. But it's about doing whatever you can in your place, always with that great commandment in mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that's all we can do. I think it's worth saying, yesterday was Good Friday. And, that was the most catastrophic day for, in the life of Christianity. And yet come Sunday, things start to look pretty good again. So, Christianity is rooted in this narrative of out of the worst kinds of circumstances can come new life. And if we hold on to that, then, we're going to be okay.
On that note, Father Hux, Matt McChlery, thank you very much. We'll finish it there.
A pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob.
Excellent.
Thank you.